Virtue, as some may define it, is connected with goodness, excellence, and integrity, among others. But deep down, have you ever wondered what happiness truly is? Is a happy life a life of virtue? Well, in the pursuit of understanding happiness and morality, Aristotle, one of the greatest pupils of Plato, opened a philosophical discourse and laid out a foundation for ethics. Among these is his work entitled The Nicomachean Ethics.
Book 1, The Human God. One of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics lays the groundwork for his exploration of the nature of happiness and the virtues essential to living a flourishing life. In this foundational text, Aristotle delves into the concept of the highest good, emphasizing the importance of moral virtues and the role they play in achieving eudaimonia, or human flourishing. Through insightful reflection and philosophical inquiry, Aristotle sets the stage for the profound examination of ethics and the pursuit of the good life. According to Aristotle, every craft, line of inquiry, action, and decision seeks some of the good and ultimate end, or goal, but these goods differ. Pursuing action supporting the higher goal is also good. Aristotle's begin with a discussion of four types of goal-directed pursuits. The first two pursuits are aimed at producing something beyond themselves. The later two are the pursuit for their own sakes. But Aristotle will go on to argue that even this ultimate directed towards a higher good. In chapter 2 of book 1 of Nicomachean Ethics, asserts that actions have inherent end and identifying the ultimate or best good is crucial for determining the ideal way of life. This knowledge, he argues, is vital for everyone, and he deemed political science as the highest ruling science. Guiding the study of various science in cities, even disciplines like generalship and household management are subordinate to political science, as it encompasses the ends of these sciences. Aristotle contends that the ultimate end is the human good, with the good of the city surpassing that of an individual. He acknowledged his inquiry as a form of political science, seeking a finer and more divine good. In chapter 3 of book 1, Aristotle expressed his intent to provide a general overview of the truth and urged readers to accept his claims with a similar degree of approximations. He contends that the young individual, due to their inexperience and emotion impulsivity, are unsuitable students of political science. However, for those who align their desires with reason, knowledge of political science proves highly beneficial, and Aristotle implies that individuals who are expert in their area of interest is good judges in that area, but the unqualified good judges is the person educated in every area. In the pursuit of highest good, Aristotle asks what that good is. Most people will agree that it is happiness, but they disagree about what is happiness consists of. Aristotle acknowledges differing opinions on its nature. He asserts that to determine this ultimate good, one must start from what is already known, emphasizing the importance of being raised with virtuous habits to become proficient in understanding fine and just things. Aristotle suggests that without foundation in admirable ways of thinking, one may struggle to undertake the inquiry effectively, implying that familiarity with goodness is crucial to comprehending what is truly good. People generally shape their understanding of the good based on what type of life they live, and Aristotle identifies three main types of life: lives of gratification, political activity, and the study. Those focused on gratification lead a life comparable to animals, while those engaged in political activity associate the good with honor, albeit Aristotle considered this inferior. The life of study to be further explored emerged as the most directed towards the good. Despite this, Aristotle grapples with an ongoing tension between the study, which is optimal for the individuals, and political activity, which is necessary to preserve the common good for society as a whole. Aristotle emphasizes the need to clarify the meaning of the term good before proceeding with his inquiry. He observed the diverse ways in which the concept is used, concluding that there isn't a singular universal good. Unlike Plato's idea of universal form, where earthly objects are just echoes, Aristotle rejects the notion of the universal idea of the good. He questioned the practical relevance of such a universal form for individuals like weavers, carpenters, or doctors, emphasizing the importance of focusing on particularities in daily life rather than the abstract universals. Aristotle distanced himself from Plato's emphasis on forms, preferring a more practical approach centered on the specific and tangible aspect of human experience. Aristotle contends that the highest good, which is pursued for its own sakes and not as means to an end, is happiness. Unlike pursuit like honor or pleasure, happiness is chosen for its own intrinsic value. To understand the highest good, Aristotle suggests examining the unique function of human beings. While sharing certain functions with plants and animals, humanity's distinctive function is the life of action of the part of our soul that has a reason. Describing human life in terms of activity, Aristotle specifies the human function as the activity of the soul in accordance with the reason of requiring reasons. And the excellence person function is to live this life well and finely. Aristotle emphasized that understanding the purpose of human existence is crucial for comprehending the good. He argues that the distinctive aspects of human is the capacity for reason, and the human good is the activity of the soul in accordance with the virtue. With virtue defined as the excellence in performing one's functions, Aristotle lays the groundwork for further exploration into the nature of virtue and its role in completing and fulfilling life. Aristotle acknowledged that the achievement of happiness is not solely an internal matter, but also depend on external factors. He notes that a certain external resources such as friends, wealth, and political power contribute to happiness. Conversely, the absence of deprivation of things like beauty, a spouse, or children can diminish happiness. In essence, Aristotle recognized the degree of prosperity influenced by external circumstances plays a role in facilitating or hindering the attainment of happiness. Aristotle explains that while it may be reasonable to consider happiness as a divine gift of some extent, he focused on the idea that happiness results from virtue in the form of learning or cultivations. He emphasized that the learning of or cultivation is accessible to anyone with the capacity for virtue. Aristotle's perspective is not centered on a metaphysic sense of happiness. Rather, he is concerned with how individuals can actively pursue and achieve happiness through the deliberate development of virtuous qualities. Aristotle argues that genuine happiness comes from living a complete life where actions align with complete virtue and are supported by sufficient external goods. He emphasized that the importance of holistic approach, connecting the virtuous behavior, external well-being, and the fulfillment of a whole life. Aristotle argues that the happiness of a person is not significantly affected by the well-being or misfortune of friends or descendants after their death. While these external factors may have some influence, they do not fundamentally change the clarification of a person as a happy or unhappy in Aristotle's view. Aristotle explores the relationship between the virtue and happiness, contending that the happiness is the result of the soul's activity in accordance with a complete virtue. He breaks down the soul into a rational and non-rational parts, categorizing virtue as those of thought and character. These distinctions reflect the collaboration between the rational and non-rational aspect of soul, as Aristotle seeks to comprehend the complexity of human nature. Aristotle's exploration in Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics remains relevant in our daily lives, prompting reflections on happiness and the virtues essential to a flourishing existence. His emphasis on moral virtues such as honesty and compassion finds a practical application in modern scenarios, guiding individuals in ethical decision making and the pursuit of the virtuous life. Aristotle's philosophy encouraged a universal aspiration for human flourishing, inviting individuals to consider the ethical dimensions of their choices and their impact on the overall well-being, contributing to a deeper understanding of leading a fulfilling life in the complexity of the real world.
Throughout our lives, society has inculcated in us the virtues of justice, patience, perseverance, courage, truthfulness, and the like. We've been encouraged to be virtuous, to do good, and to stand by good. However, do we truly understand the concept of moral virtue? And how is it even acquired? Innate ba ito sa atin or is it something that we cultivate over time? Well, Book 2, entitled Moral Virtue in the Nicomachean Ethics, offers valuable insights into these questions as per the notions of Aristotle. Virtue has two kinds, intellectual and moral virtue. But what's the difference? Intellectual virtue, as the name implies, can be taught and learned, for which it requires time and experience to develop. On the other hand, moral virtue, like the arts, is acquired by repetition of the corresponding acts. Simply put, moral virtue is acquired through practice, or in other words, a result of our habits. Hindi natin matututunan ang isang bagay kung hindi natin ito ginagawa. The same is true for moral virtue. Aristotle also asserts that none of the moral virtue arises in us by nature. Why? Something that exists by nature cannot simply be trained to behave contrary to its nature, but instead, we are given natural capacities to receive moral virtue or to be morally virtuous. And these capacities are made perfect by habit, meaning it is through training ourselves to be virtuous that we become one, just as how we learn the arts by practicing them. An architect becomes an architect by practicing the discipline of architecture. The same applies to moral virtue. We too become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, and brave by doing brave acts. Sabi nga, hindi sapat yung puro salita lang, dapat ginagawa rin. What happens to individuals also applies to society. Legislators make the citizens good by forming habits in them, and this is where political science comes in. Through the use of political science, legislators can form political systems to habituate people to becoming morally virtuous, and it is by evaluating systems that we can differentiate a good constitution from a bad one. Practicing a craft does not necessarily mean that you'll be good at it. For instance, an individual will be a good or bad builder from building well or badly, and for this reason, a teacher is crucial to guide in performing these crafts. In relation to virtues, by performing acts in our interaction with other individuals, we become just or unjust, brave or cowardly, depending on the circumstances. Just like how a teacher is needed, a certain state of character is required to perform these acts. Section 2 states, these acts cannot be prescribed exactly, but must avoid excess and defect. We do not study virtue for the sole purpose of grasping a theoretical idea of what virtue is, but rather to become good. Aanhin ba natin ang mga konsepto kung hindi naman natin ginagamit in actual situations? But first, we must act in accordance with the correct reason. In every circumstance, we must consider the appropriate actions, such as how we look into individual cases and medical prescriptions. It is the nature of such things to be destroyed by defect and excess. This indicates that our state or dispositions, built up through our habits, can be corrupted by extremes. Anumang bagay na sobra ay nakakasira at anumang bagay na kulang ay nakakasama. For example, consuming an inadequate or excessive amount of food can adversely affect our health, but striking a balance can safeguard it. The same is the case for virtues. For the man who flies from and fears everything and does not stand his ground against anything becomes a coward. Hence, fighting the mean is the foundation of preserving virtue. By abstaining from pleasures, we become temperate, and it is when we have become so that we are most able to abstain from them. For example, if we become habituated to standing up against injustices, nagiging just tayo, and it is when we have become just that we will be more resilient and able to stand up against them. Now, Section 3 asserts, pleasure in doing virtuous acts is a sign that the virtuous disposition has been acquired. A variety of considerations show the essential connection of moral virtue with pleasure and pain. Aristotle contends that pleasure or pain is a sign of someone's state of character. For instance, someone who delights in abstaining from pleasure is temperate, while someone who is pained at it is self-indulgent. And it is on account of pleasure that we do bad things, and on account of pain that we abstain from noble ones. Pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain have led individuals to steer away from virtuous acts. Here's a sample scenario. A corrupt individual will be delighted when presented with excessive wealth, even at the expense of others, while pained when unable to attain his desires. However, a virtuous person will find pleasure in turning away from luxuries. Citing Plato, Aristotle agrees that the right education from our youth is a way to act on pleasures and pain in the right way according to what is appropriate. Furthermore, virtue is concerned with actions and passions, or feelings, and feelings are accompanied by pleasure and pain. Thus, virtue is also concerned with pleasures and pain. Virtue induces individuals to act in the right way in managing pleasures and pain, but vice induces them to do the contrary. There are three objects influencing choice: the noble, advantageous, and pleasant, and three influencing avoidance of actions: the base, injurious, and painful. But a virtuous man will go on to make the appropriate decision, while the bad one will go on making the wrong decision. Section 4 states, an objection to the view that one acquires virtues by doing virtuous acts, and a reply, the conditions needed to possess virtue and act from it. Here, Aristotle argues that performing virtuous acts is not enough, but a person must be in a certain condition at the time. Unlike in the arts wherein yung end product is judged, virtue delves deeper into certain conditions and state of mind. First, they must have knowledge of what they are doing. Second, they must decide to act in the right way for the sake of becoming virtuous. And third, perform those acts from a firm and unchangeable character. So, virtue is rooted in the motive of an individual, not merely because it is necessary to do so. Section 5 defines moral virtue. It is a state of character, not a passion, nor a capacity. There are three components found in the soul: passion, capacities, and states of character. Passion involves our appetites and feelings, accompanied by pleasure or pain. Capacities are concerned with our ability to experience feelings, and states being our disposition with regard to our passions. Virtues and vices are not passions. We are not labeled as good or bad, praised or blamed because we feel certain emotions. Likewise, we are also not considered good or bad simply because we are born with the capacity to feel. Hence, virtue and vice are not capacities as well. Instead, virtue and vice are states of character. Section 6 declares the differentia of moral virtue. It is a disposition to choose the intermediate, two kinds of intermediate distinguished. Virtue is a disposition to aim for the mean between excess and defects. Feelings can be felt too much or too little, but virtue deals with feeling them at appropriate times toward the right people with the right motive and performed in the right way. Thus, virtue is intentional in contrast to feelings and capacities which are uncontrolled and inherent parts of our being. However, not all acts have a mean, such as adultery, murder, theft, and the like, as these do not have excess or deficiencies and cannot ever be right. Some things are by implication good or bad. Aristotle explains the mean with reference to particular virtues and discusses how the mean acts as the appropriate action between the two extremes. Courage is the mean for rashness and coward. Temperance is for self-indulgence and insensibility. Liberality is for prodigality and meanness. Magnificence is for tastelessness or vulgarity and niggardliness. Proper pride is for empty vanity and undue humility. Truthfulness is for boastfulness and mock modesty, and ready-witted for buffoonery and boorishness. Relating it lang to the current Gen Z trend, to simplify it, yung OA at nonchalant. OA being the excessive side, while nonchalant, or in this context, extreme indifference being the deficient side, and ang mean naman nun is what is right for the situation. Section 8 highlights three kinds of disposition, of which two are vices, excess and deficiency, while the other one is virtue, which is the mean. The extremes, which are excess and deficiency, are opposed to each other and to the mean. For example, a brave man will appear rash compared to a coward, and cowardly relative to a rash man. The two extremes contrast greater as they are further from each other on the scale. However, there are instances where certain extremes are closer to the mean. Thus, we oppose not this extreme but its opposite. For example, rashness is considered an excess and is closer to courage, the mean, compared to cowardice, while insensibility is closer to temperance than self-indulgence. Those that are farther from the mean are considered more contrary to it, and our natural tendencies are deemed to be more contrary to the mean, for instance, the tendency to be self-indulgent. Finally, the last section asserts that the mean is hard to attain and is grasped by perception, not by reasoning. Aristotle ends Book 2 with practical advice for attaining a virtuous character. He acknowledges that it takes hard work to be virtuous, as one must tread lightly and be aware of natural tendencies. He suggested that we turn ourselves away from extremes opposed to the mean, abstain from tempting vices, and be wary of pleasures. And in this world, it is easy to be tempted and to fall into the trap of engaging in vices. Wars, disarray, corruption, ill-gotten wealth, and such problems have tainted the peace and order in society. These issues highlight the cruciality of looking to where we fall in the scale. Have we acted following the extremes, and if yes, which side are we on? Applying it to business management, it really takes hard work and discernment to steer away from vices, especially in handling financial sources, as some leaders are inclined to be carried away from these, resulting in unethical decisions. As such, Book 2 of Nicomachean Ethics acts as a guiding principle in searching for virtue and living a life in moderation.
The pleasures arising from thinking and learning will make us think and learn all the more. Where the previous parts of the Nicomachean Ethics talked about the human good and the moral virtue, the last book talks about pleasure, how hedonism values contradict the true essence of the highest good, and how it affects people in finding complete happiness. The final book goes back to its central message: what is happiness, and how do we reach it? The last book of Nicomachean Ethics is entitled Pleasure. Let us discuss it in parts. In the first three chapters, Aristotle dwells on the book's main topic, which is pleasure. He states, some people think pleasure is the ultimate good, while others think, or are persuaded to think, pleasure is evil. This line primarily summarizes the first half of the book, because Aristotle tells us how some philosophers and hedonists have a perspective that pleasure is the highest good in life. It is the main purpose of our lives and why we live. Aristotle disagrees with the claims. He states those false arguments are not grounded on facts, but rather on feelings and emotions. All animals continually pursue pleasure and avoid pain, so pleasure must be the highest good. Hedonists think that pursuing pleasure is the ultimate goal of life. Aristotle mentioned the statements of other philosophers, and even if he recognizes these claims, he stands by his word that pleasure is suitable for many, but it is not the highest good. In chapters 4 and 5, he states that pleasure is a state that can be reached at any moment rather than a process. It emerges from some activity and fulfills all of the others activities. The pleasures that complete the activities of the complete and blessedly happy man are the purest forms of human fulfillment. Here, he mentions virtuous pleasure, which is his belief that a person who follows reason and leads a reasonable life and righteous life will inherently find true pleasure. Just as good or bad actions lead to good or bad behaviors, virtuous pleasures originates from good actions. This is the part that I mentioned in the introduction. He states how all humans' pleasure differs from their needs, wants, and who they are as a person. One might think that their pleasure is good, while the other thinks it is terrible. In the second half of the book, chapters 7 to 8 goes back to the whole argument of the Nicomachean ethics, which asks, what is happiness? How do people reach that highest good associated with virtuous pleasure? If happiness is the ultimate aim of human beings, what ultimate virtue can guide them towards it? The answer is understanding. Aristotle believes that understanding is what brings other people closest to the divine, to the highest good. He states that study and other activities in accordance with the study lead to understanding. Studying satisfies every requirement to achieve virtuous pleasure. Aristotle emphasizes that the gods favor humans in favor of a person whose activities are coordinated with study or understanding since it is the most godlike activity. The last part highlights the significance of study and moral education and how they constitute becoming a virtuous person. Because all activities associated with reason and understanding lead to pure happiness and pleasure. Moreover, a virtuous life must also attain being familiar and accorded by law. This means that a person must be familiar with appropriate laws from their youth so that they will grow accustomed to virtue as they reach a certain age. In conclusion, the last part emphasizes the importance of contemplation when seeking the highest level of happiness. Aristotle emphasizes the value of intellectual pursuits and leisure in the pursuit of ultimate fulfillment. He also tells us that contemplative practice permits people to connect with their divine side and achieve happiness. Nicomachean ethics allows us to investigate the nature of human happiness and how it might be obtained by cultivating virtues and leading a virtuous life. It explains the purpose of ethics and moral philosophy through the characteristics and practices that lead to the greatest good. That ends Book 1, 2, and 10 of Nicomachean Ethics. Thank you so much for listening.